Welcome once again to The Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture, a pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast where we focus on various aspects of video games as well as other issues and topics within gaming in general. Hi, and welcome back to Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture. I am your last samurai standing, Scott Thurlow, here with my fellow Ronin, Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I'm more of a six-string samurai.
Mm-hmm. And Stephen Amosi.
And I am going to assassinate people, but not by choice.
Indeed. And yes, as you may have gathered, maybe a little late to the party, but we're going to talk about Ghost of Tsushima, the recent release Sucker Punch new title. I think came out about mid-late-ish July, so it's about mid-late-ish, early mid-August right now, the day of this recording. And yeah, we've all been enjoying this game, and I'm going to go over to E to tell us about his experiences, because I think you are the first one who did it.
Well, I bought it digitally, or I pre-ordered it, actually. And I spent, about 3 days straight platinuming Ghost of Tsushima. I love it. It's one of my favorite games of the PS4 era, and even if we're late to the party, it's still a game worth talking about.
Certainly.
That's my experience with it, a glowing review.
Yeah, so it's funny because we for sure mentioned, it's like you dig back in our back catalog, and E3, I want to say 2017 or 18 or something like that, they showed off the trailer / the teaser for this game, and we were like, holy shit, that looks so good, right, looks amazing, I can't wait to play it. And then it was about 2 years, not much came out of it. They didn't say a lot out of a camp one way or another, assuming they were just working on it. So when it finally dropped, as I got closer, I was sort of jonesing to play it, right? I had pre-ordered the physical copy, so which meant I had to wait a little bit to actually get it shipped to me. So the day it was supposed to come, I was like, I can't wait. I was taking off of work and shit. I was I'm taking that to work. And yeah, I think I have in my raw notes, I often do impressions of any game I play throughout the year, right? It's almost to me, the culmination of third world action game design, in a sense, action adventure design. It strips out a lot of the bullshit from what has come before, the things that are annoying, and even Steve, I think you can talk about it in a sec. You're probably less tolerant of that kind of shit than Ian and I would be, even in general. So it just does a great job. And yeah, if this is a swan song for this generation, it's one of the best ones. And I will give you guys some numbers in a few when we get to it. But just on the surface, it had a lot of hype around it, and certainly I personally got more hyped for it as the countdown clicked to release date. And yeah, once I got my hands on it, like you said, I just could not stop playing it for a week straight or so. Every free second I had was going to be devoted to Tsushima, and I enjoyed every second of it. So with that, what's your impression so far, Steve-O? Because I know you're a little bit, you haven't, Ian and I have completed it, you have not, so you are where you are, so.
Yeah, I'm a bit behind. I'm maybe halfway through the game, I would say, around that at this point. And yeah, it's been awesome. So this is a type of game that has caused me to kind of lose interest in the past, just in terms of the mechanics of it and how it's put together. I'm hoping that's not the case in this game. I've been really loving it so far. There's a lot of not only technically great parts of it. It looks amazing, as you can see on my background if you're watching this.
Oh, it's a beautiful game, yeah, of course.
It's also mechanically a really great game in terms of the fighting and the sword fighting and stuff like that. And there's also really interesting stories that are going on. I hope, and you guys have kind of said it seems to not get too fetch questy towards the end. So that's good. And I'm looking forward to playing the rest of it. So yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it strips away a lot of the annoyance of bullshit of the game design that you've sort of come to know and probably are familiar with from such a game in this genre. But I think that's one of the many strengths of it. So,
well, one of the fascinating aspects is the response that Ghost of Tsushima has had.
Indeed.
One is that critics in general tend to have a slightly more negative view of it than the general public does, which it has overwhelmingly positive reviews. And the Reddit Ghost of Tsushima is incredibly active.
It's a cool thread.
And it seems to, it's interesting because this is kind of a theme that's coming up, is that as I continue as a critic in quotes, I'm noticing things that develop in a critic's mind when they're looking at a work that might not resonate with the general audience versus the general audience loving something that a critic doesn't see what's so special, because they play, or if they're watching movies, they watch all the movies. They play games, they play all the games. And it seems that you're right when you say that this took all of the elements of what came before. And actually, I think it's a great codifier as the end of the generation, because it was a perfection of one of the most common types of games out there nowadays. But even interesting, I found that the Yakuza director was like, "Oh, this is a great game. Japan should have made it first." And I think that the Japanese are in love with this game, where in a sense I've seen negatives from Asian American descendants from Japan, or cultural appropriation, versus actual Japanese. I love this work. So it's fascinating that conflict between the academia versus the regular person.
Yes, it certainly garnered a lot of analysis, more so than I've seen about a lot of games, and some of it is certainly clickbaity, at least to me, from the feeds that I've got, certainly. But I wanted to tie in, speaking of the reaction you said, right? So I'll just give you some hard and fast numbers about it, because that always sort of I'm intrigued by these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it sold 2.4 million copies in the first 3 days of release. So I believe, again, like I said, it released mid-late July. So 3 days of launch, that made it Sony's, if I hadn't mentioned, it's a Sony exclusive, it's PS exclusive. So unfortunately, if you don't have PS, you cannot play Ghost at this time. But given that it was exclusive, it is their fastest selling original IP, breaking the record from Horizon Zero Dawn, which I felt like, to sort of tie both things in, when I played Horizon Zero, I was like, oh yeah, it takes many familiar elements from these kinds of games. And I felt like the same reaction I had to that as I had to Ghost, but even and more so in a sense, because it's been 4 years since that, right? So it overtook that, Steve-O. It also overtook Bloodborne, which was previously one of the fastest selling original IPs, and Days Gone, which also exists. It was a top selling game on the UK charts for 3 weeks running. Even when it was somewhat against Animal Crossing, shit like that, it was against Last of Us technically, right? And here's some further information that I thought was pretty cool that I didn't know, or I wasn't familiar with. In Japan, it sold about 220,000 copies in the first week, surpassing the record, which is previously held by Death Stranding, which wasn't that Death Stranding wasn't that long ago.
That's really interesting, because Death Stranding was almost American title made by a Japanese guy, was the opposite.
By Kojima's production studios, for sure, right? So it's a publication called, sorry if I mispronounce it, Famitsu, I believe, is a big, they cover a lot of video games over in Japan, and collating, a site that collates their data is that, so Death Stranding sold about 185,000 copies in its launch week, which was ahead of Gran Turismo, blah, blah, sorry, some numbers. Here's the interesting. Tsushima was only the third Western-developed game by Fukushima to receive a perfect score from the publication, a 40 out of 40. The other two were Grand Theft Auto 5 and Skyrim. Okay. So, that's, pretty damn impressive. Given that those are, the only other ones, and, they don't give out perfect scores, seemingly, versus, the American publications, which I have an issue with. But I'm just saying, those are the numbers, and, that was the reception for it. And also, the last stat I have for you is, as of this time, it is the highest user-rated game of this generation on Metacritic with a 9.3. That's higher than God of War. It's higher than Spider-Man. It's higher than Halo's. Higher a bunch of Xbox shit. Higher than Last of Us, which has its own thing. But all I'm saying is, to Ian's point, the reception on it has been, by and large, very well received. Where critics are a little less enthused about it, but they're still quite enthused. So
I'll say this is one of the So like, you know, I don't play nearly as many games as you do, Scott, but this is one of the few games that like really has my attention of, you know, the last
Sure.
5-6 years, right? Like it's tough for me to get
I think
super
that's
into a
saying
game
something
these days.
within our small group, right?
Yeah. And of those games that you mentioned, honestly, I probably put God of War higher than this, because that was just like broke so much new ground. Like this is like an amazing version of a game I played before. That was like a new game to me almost.
That's fair.
And like this would be like kind of on par with how I rate Spider-Man, the last Spider-Man game, which I absolutely loved. And this is kind of like my enjoyment rating is kind of at the same point with those two games, I would say. So of those games that you mentioned, that's kind of where I'm at.
So would you compare web slinging around New York similar to standoffs?
Like the standoff mechanic is perhaps like the only really new thing about this game, but it's so fucking amazing. I absolutely love doing standoffs, and it just makes you feel fucking really cool while you're doing it, and like you're in it, like you're in it. You know, it's got that as many people have said before, and like it's kind of the point of the game, but like it's got that Kurosawa factor, and like moments like that, or like the duels, really make you feel like you're in a movie.
The duels, fucking sick.
And like, yeah, it's just it's all these things that you've done before, but like polished down to like the best parts of them, and also kind of made to have a certain aesthetic which you haven't really seen before, I don't think. Like even
at least not as much.
Even Sekiro, which came out like fairly recently,
I disliked quite a bit.
Agreed.
Had I you know, like I can't say I disliked Sekiro. There was a lot of it that was really cool, but it got down to it was a From Software game that I wasn't nearly as into as like some of the other ones, and which makes it like you really have to fucking love From Software games to get through them. And but it has like some of that same type of like aesthetic, but this one I think polishes it down a bit more and like makes it more cinematic, I guess, like Japanese cinematic, which really you can feel while you're playing, and it's awesome.
I actually think this is a good jumping off point for another topic on this.
Sure.
Because I've been actually watching a lot of, I used the term academic earlier, which I should have said critical, because I've actually been looking at academic analysis, like Japanese historians. There's a famous one of an Italian professor in Japanese history. But the idea is that while this isn't necessarily a 100% accurate reproduction of the Mongol invasion of the first Mongol invasion of Japan, it's an accurate representation of Kurosawa film.
Right.
So in a sense, it's embracing Japanese history, but it's also embracing modern Japanese mythology of the
within
samurai.
It. Yes.
And I think that's where that kind of, like, if you ever played Kingdom Come, that's a historically accurate work to perhaps an isolating level. This is an embracing of the mythology of a culture that is very accessible, and
exactly
it holds that level of like the concepts of honor, the concepts of sacrifice that go into the kind of what I think in general population views Japan to be like, and that's I think where it captured the imagination of people. And someone said like it was like this isn't accurate historically, but it's accurate for There's nothing wrong with that, and I don't think. I think that's why this is great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like it's a spiritual homage essentially, and like I said, or I mentioned precast that Sucker Punch the devs, like they said that like we're not trying to recreate like, necessarily a 1-to-1. What we want to do is do a very respectful but also original idea, but using the elements of specifically Kurosawa films and the mythology therein, the storytelling that he utilized when he was making films within that. Right, translate it to a game that will be fun and also, like you said, Sivo, have a cinematic flair to it that isn't quite the case that other games within its sphere would have otherwise. So,
right, I think this is something that like wants to like tell you a little bit about the history, but over more important than that is, and always like at all times when they were designing this, I feel like they wanted to hold like themes and the in-game narrative and especially like the aesthetic of the world above like anything else. Like they wanted to create this feeling more so than like this exact history.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Which I think is happening a lot these days. And like I feel like I find myself talking in the same way about a lot of things in TV, right? Like The Great, which just came out, or like things like that. And like I don't have a problem with that, right? Like I think things like this make you go and look up the actual history of what happened there. Like you get more interested in it, and you can go and find out what actually happened pretty easily. But what you can't get easily is this aesthetic, this feeling of like, you know, what's going on in this world, and that's something that it gives to you that you can't get from reading a history book. You know, like I really love it for that.
Yep.
Now, I haven't played the modern Assassin's Creed games, but I played a number of the original, the Ezio trilogy, and it's interesting because I feel that those there's has to be comparisons between Assassin's Creed
Certainly,
and
I don't disagree.
Tsushima. But it's interesting. I feel that the more modern day Assassin's Creed are on the pathway that Ghost is, but the original ones were doing history with their own mythology, and so they had to focus heavily on mythology of the Animus and the Templars
And all that
the Assassins.
crap,
And where this is getting rid of everything but creating the historical Japan with the mythology of the samurai. I think that's what makes it a stronger narrative.
I agree. Like I said, so like they strip away, like, so for example, like given that specific example, right? The AC series, which again, as listeners and you guys might know, is up and down for me. But certainly, like you can't avoid comparing them, or at least including them in the conversation when you're talking about Ghosts. Mm-hmm. But I think the big difference is, like, yes, they didn't have to, like, they were not burdened by some convoluted lore that they themselves set up. Therefore, they could just put you into the setting and, yeah, like, use, like, some loose historical elements, but there's no other, like, framework beyond it. Like, you're a character in it. Like, you're not, like, animusing yourself into this character, right? You're just a samurai from the invasion of, again, roughly sort of, there's a word for this that I want to. Like, it's sort of, not an anagram, right? Like, it's a broad view of, like, that era and, like, what was happening. So given that, again, that means they can strip that away and focus on more enjoyable parts without distracting you with that kind of stuff. And again, it works both on the narrative front and on the gameplay front, I would say.
You know, in terms of that, like, I'm almost on, not on the other side of the argument, but I, like, never having played fully through an Assassin's Creed game, but watching a bunch and knowing basically everything about the whole series because I talked to Scott.
You saw the film, too, and that
yeah,
just as good.
But, like, the thing is, like, I feel like the Assassin's Creed series suffered from, like, bad writing or something, or, like, I feel like they fucked up. Like, the whole conceit of that, and, like, it's completely opposite from this, but it's my, like, little side argument here. I feel like the whole idea of that I thought was really fucking cool, and I feel like they screwed it up, like, monumentally, and just
they squandered the potential of the idea.
Like,
yes,
like that would have been awesome if it had been pulled off correctly. Like the idea that there's this, you know, overarching company that, like, runs the world that is, like, sending people back, like, kind of back in time to, like, whatever. Like, I feel like that could have been done really well, and I feel like they fucked it up. But that being said, I'm glad there's nothing like that in this game to, like, take away, because what's really important in this game is the storyline of what's happening with Jin, your hero, and all the people that he meets. Like, all these, like, little side quests are so fucking cool, and you get to meet all these interesting characters and go on these interesting little missions. And they're all pretty quick. Like, none of them take too long, at least so far. Like, the longest ones are like the really big ones. And even those are like, if you're going through it quickly, like 15, 20 minutes, you know, like maybe a little bit longer, but not too much longer. And I think I just love being able to like wander through this world and either A, stumble upon things, or B, like have the, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, but have the world tell you where to go, right? The entire idea of like everything in your surroundings, everything physically around you is like pointing the way that you should be going, and like has this like feeling of connection to the nature of the world. And like this, you know, you follow foxes, you follow birds, you follow the grass, like the blowing of the wind. All that stuff is really fascinating. Like just your attunement with nature in this is like a really fascinating thing. And like
You get to pet some foxes.
And it all
That's what's
ties in.
important.
pet a goddamn fox every once in a while. It's great. And you know, and just like the almost like, it has a feeling of almost like the Mongols are, and they are like this invading force, and like nature, the entire island is telling you where to go to like stop them.
Well, the black smoke of their destruction is intruding upon the nature of your environment.
Oh, absolutely.
And it feels like they're an unwanted presence in this land. So you're absolutely right. Now, like you just said, though, is that you brought up a number of you set off a bird, you let out a fox, and you blew in different topics we can cover from here. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, but or kind of diverging from Assassin's Creed, because that was a lot of its themes are broken up with or discussing this overarching plot to how history was shaped, where this can just look at this moment in time and explore different things. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Okay. I am fascinated by the ethics of war. I've taken a couple classes, philosophy classes in college on it, and I think that there's some very interesting discussions going on in this work. I just realized that I didn't write down anybody's name, so I never know names. If you've ever watched her shows, I never know names about anything. But
you don't even know his own name.
I go by multiple ones. So, of course, honor is going to be a one of the main frameworks, and the limits of honor, but also the practical usage of it. And it's fascinating is that I started this game off with having a mixed balance, but as I got better, I switched over to hard. I played it before Lethal was. I got actually very good at the game, so I started feeling that actually being the ghost was cheating a little bit. That I had power, thus it was my responsibility to be honorable in fights and do standoffs. But then, as the enemies started adapting some of the more negative tactics, which you haven't gotten to yet, Steve, but I started.
You'll see.
Yeah, I like. And as the enemy AI adapted, I started implementing more ghosts because that power dynamic has changed. Sure. And I'm fascinated by that. They both what tactics should be and should not be used in war, and how being honorable as a less powerful actor in a war can be harmful, but it should be implemented if you're the more powerful actor in a conflict.
I mean, yes, I think that is something that they've incorporated. Like, how should I say? In any other game, it wouldn't have been as nuanced and subtly fleshed out and explored as the narrative unfolds, right? Yeah. So, like, on top of everything we just previously said up to this point, that's another point where, like, I don't think Horizon's, for example, like, narrative was that great. It was okay. It was fine. But it did not reach the levels that Ghost was able to reach. And the funny thing is, like, I was going to mention, like, as I often make my little notes, as I mentioned, about games, if I had to make a blog line for Ghost, it'd be like Assassin's Creed, Red Dead Samurai. But that is so reductionist, right? Because those games, like, you're right, Steve, or one of you, both of you said the narrative in either of those, like, while good to some degree, does not explore that kind of thing. And I think it approaches God of War, as you mentioned, Steve-O, because you can, if you're RPing, I guess if you want to say, in Ghost, then yeah, you're going to probably want to do the standoffs, which is also, on top of that, a extremely satisfying game mechanic that you haven't quite seen in anything else. So it ties in however you want to do it. If you want to do your Assassin's Creed kind of thing, like your Ghost, your options, it's totally viable. The game does not punish you. There's no morality meter or anything like that at all.
But you do get kind of chastised if
like
you
here and there. Yes, but there's no, like, again, a lot like Sucker Punch made Infamous before this, right?
Yeah.
So there were certainly like straight up morality meters in those games. In this, there isn't, like, but that tension like is there for you as a player and as a person if you want it to be. And I think that's a very impressive achievement that, like, you can totally ignore it. You're like, I don't give a shit. I'm just gonna play like whatever is, like, you know, efficiently optimal to get through it. But if you sort of get more into it, immerse yourself into it, it does make a difference. And it's amazing that they have both are viable play styles.
Sorry, Steve, I'm going to interrupt for a second because with God of War, that had perhaps the most impressive emotional narrative I've ever played in a game, where this, I feel, has a more philosophical narrative, one of the better ones I've seen, aside from perhaps Nier, but like accessibility with deeper dives into philosophical ethics. I think I'm also giving or hopefully we'll be next summer giving a talk about this game.
To be expanded upon, but certainly, yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that. Go on, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have too much more to say. I think that I actually, when you said that you didn't know all the character names, I kind of went off on my own little dive to go find the character names and like
figure them out. Yeah.
I was like, which ones was I forgetting? And like, yeah, I couldn't remember the Khan's names as Khotun Khan and
Khan. Yep.
But like, as far as all of that goes, you know, I think it's a really fascinating, like, in terms of what you said, Ian, where like God of War is a more like emotionally impactful game. This is more like philosophically impactful, I guess. Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Like there are like multiple times, you know, like this is a game that feels like you should feel like you're getting hammered over the head with the fucking message, but it doesn't really feel like that.
Exactly.
Although, to be fair, I did tear up during this game with the you haven't seen her yet, but with your
a certain
father's
character.
mistress. I actually my eyes were, which I actually never cried during God of War, but I did tear up. So this had perhaps at its height a more emotionally investing story, but where God of War overall was a broader aspect. But
no, yeah, like, I mean, you're right. Like, I maybe that's like the most impressive part to me. Like, amongst above and beyond everything we said about how game design, etc. Like, they learn, like, they just use the best things from the past and strip down all the stupid bullshit. But thematically, and then like it's like the opposite of ludonarrative dissonance, I guess, of what I'm saying. Like ludonarrative coherence, I suppose. Whatever. Like, look, seriously, like, because it's so subtly there, and the writing is, it's going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I don't mean it to be, way better than you expect it to be, like, in a title like this, right? Like, and again, maybe it's because I'm so trained on like the AC stuff, which, as you said, Steve-O, is okay written at best, but because they're able to integrate it extremely well, and that sort of like resonates back to you as a player and how you're going to approach the combat. Like, even though it doesn't really make a difference at the end of the day, like, sometimes a character will like maybe say like a thing or two about it, like will comment upon what you did, like your play style, but it by and large doesn't change it. But what it does do is constantly like keep it intertwined, like in a Barthian way, I guess I might say, right, throughout.
Hey, Bart.
Yeah. So like, Bars would love this game, certainly, right? But I'm saying, like, it's there, like it never goes away. It's not like ever relegated into the background, but neither is it, as you said, like punching you in the face constantly about it. It just perfectly is there as you go along, and it has you choose to play and what you choose to do, even if like the options, like again, like are not that, it's not like Skyrim RPG shit. But
So-
you have some subtle choices, but
Well, if I may,
Yes.
just dive in without giving too many specifics. Dive into a couple of things they bring up with survivor guilt.
Mhm.
The limits of and self-destruction that revenge brings about.
certainly, yes.
Proper damage mitigation. How much should you work with an enemy group to minimize damage that's done to? Also, the idea is that the con in here is almost a very Western style sense of imperialism, where it's if you play the game, you will have
You can
benefits.
be uplifted. Yeah.
But we also see that causes destruction amongst characters as well, and like psychological harm. And it's there's, but I'm just broad brushing the topics. But I think one of the more important things is also it's very much about how the repercussion of war and how it affects every aspect of the world, not just environmentally, but the random characters you meet. All the small quests kind of have a dive into how this war has affected the lives of people. So it's not just you bloodily massacring a nameless enemy; it's you actually seeing
Yeah,
that
it
repercussion.
explores that like
Yeah.
much deeper, like I said, than most games you would think like on the surface would do and have done. Certainly.
One of the most affecting things that I've seen is is that one of Yuna's missions is you have to go and like take out this slaver town that she had previously been in. She like stops and is like, I can't go in there. And you're like, all right, I'll do it. But you like decide that you're just gonna fucking take the heads of the three main characters. And like, it's such an interesting thing because it makes such a point of like this, you need to be stealth on this mission. Like you can't be seen by anybody except those three guys, and you just need to kill them and cut their damn heads off so that
It will send the message
so
to
that the story of you as the ghost grows and you scare the Mongols even more, right? Like that's the entire idea. And like it's such a interesting and fun mission to be on.
Actually, it's very much Dark Knight as the game progresses with the same kind of.
I mean,
themes
like
of
again, like
symbolism.
right, it sort of shares like a little bit of DNA, like a little slightly from like the Arkham stuff.
Ghost of Tsushima, best Batman game I ever played.
Yeah, man. But no, like, I mean, I'm not sure we can probably gush about it like forever, but really, like, at the end of the day, I think it takes so many elements and just is so deft with them to meld like important themes and like do an homage to Kurosawa films and his sort of style and philosophy.
But Kurosawa was heavily philosophical in his work
Yeah.
as well. So
certainly.
Absolutely.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's sort of very impressive that Sucker Punch was able to do all these things and make the highest rated game of this generation so far, and a fun as hell game to play. Like, even on the surface, like, right, you'd be like, oh, another third person action open world game, like whatever, right? But when you actually get your hands on it and compared to many others, I think it is like, as I wrote in my notes, the culmination of design and narrative that has come before to cap off this generation. And I'm very excited to see what they do next. And yeah, like, if anybody hasn't played Ghost yet, we all highly recommend it. But for all those reasons, and yeah, as he said, he's going to, in fact, delve even further into the thematic and narrative elements about it, about the theme of honor itself and the role of it as portrayed by the game. Because yeah, there's a lot there to dig into, but also it's fucking awesome having samurai duels and cutting dudes' heads and arms off. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it serves both the visceral and the intellectual, and I think in the best way, in the way that game has not done for me and for many others, you know, based on the reaction of it for a long time in recent memory.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my final thing. You guys got any?
I
things
could
you
talk
want to
about smaller things here and there, but I'm willing to wrap up if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I think that's a big. Sorry, before you go, Steve-O.
Sure.
I think that's one of the big things. Like, there's so much to delve into. Like I said, we could discuss this, and we discussed this game off cast many.
We barely delved into the environments that develop. I believe there was 80 separate biomes in the game.
Yep, that sounds about right. Yeah, and that's impressive to itself.
It's the idea of photography and
photo
cosmetics.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So much in this game that you can talk about. But anyway,
but that's good.
There are so many cool things you can do. That's worth a mention, actually. There are so many cool things you can do, like with the camera. There's a full like photo mode that like allows you to like mess with the direction and speed of the wind, like the angle of the camera. Like it is like a photographer / like cinematographer's wet dream to like fucking mess around with this game, because you can just make things look exactly how you want them to look. And actually a game we mentioned earlier, Spider-Man had a very similar,
pretty cool photo mode, but I think
photo mode as well. And I think that games where they work that in, but like in a organic way, like Spider-Man, it was like, oh, you're a photographer, like Peter Parker's a photographer, so this makes sense. Or like this, it's like we're basing this off of like Kurosawa's work, so this makes sense that you can make it look like a scene from a Kurosawa movie. I love that they're doing that and things like that. I don't necessarily want to see it in like every game from now on happening, because it feels like it would be cheap in a lot of things, but like where it makes sense in games like this, I absolutely fucking love it.
Yeah, man. Certainly.
But, yeah, that's as much
I definitely agree. It does have one of the most extensive, and if you're good at it, like you could make some incredible shots. And I think one of you mentioned, like, check out the Reddit feed of it, because people are just posting like some insane, amazing things. Like I fucked around with it, but again, like I am no photographer. I don't have a photographer's eye, but it's still like, even what I got out of it, I was like, oh, sweet, look at that. We were all sending each other screenshots for like the whole week we were playing.
It's one of the most photographed games of all time, from what I understand.
For sure. And you're right, like, we could certainly go on and on about, like, we certainly missed a few things, but I think the things we did discuss, explained and did it justice as to why I say it's one of the best games of this generation, especially as the tail end switches over. Like, what a hell of a way to, like, close it off, especially for PlayStation, and hopefully, given its reception and sales and critically and fan base, we shall see some kind of like either maybe not DLC, or at least if not that, a possible full-on expansion sequel a couple years down the line when new gen is in full swing. Yeah. So that would be incredible.
Or you can create your own DLCs by going out and samurai chopping people.
Yep, you can. I don't necessarily endorse that, but I don't not endorse it either. So either way, you're right with there. Don't dab yourself. All right.
Did you see a spurt of blood come?
Honorably sheath your sword. I think we shall bow out for this episode. I have been Scott Thurlow. I rode away on my horse. I've been here with Stephen Amosi.
And I'll be following every animal I see.
And Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I'm gonna adopt some foxes.
Yes, indeed. And honor them. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you for joining the Lost Signals Games and Gaming Culture. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows and more, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.